if control of the government is so granular that they get to decide whether or not a substance can be taken by adults, I think that's an indication that what's been normalized is a level of authoritarianism that needs to be radically reviewed, whether it's under a supposed Democrat like Kamala Harris or the current administration. So my
But
position
what
is,
about what about the drug? What about bigger drugs that everyone knows? So what, heroin, cocaine. I mean, what is the line where you think, or is it all drugs? You don't think there should be any laws and people can do what they want?
that is one way of saying what I believe. Yes, I think there should be zero prohibition, and that these highly, highly addictive substances should be regulated from a medical perspective rather than a criminal judicial one.
And we're back again. Actual friends, Russell. What's your name? Russell Brand and State Steele. Hi. How are you?
I feel pretty peaceful and pretty at ease, and I'm enjoying our increasingly intimate conversations as one by one the other contributors drop out. I mean, I think next week it'll be actual friends with just one of us.
Which will be very telling to see who's gonna we should remind people that our trusty leader, Dave Rubin, he goes off the grid every August. It is something I thought, maybe he's onto something, Russell. He just disappears. No technology, no cell phones, no nothing for a month. So he is the creator of the Actual Friends show, but he, dumps us for a month every year. I hope he's enjoying himself in some, I don't know where the hell he is, some jungle somewhere, probably on a different continent. But when he
Mm.
comes back, we're going to give him a hard time for, I guess we're not his actual friend, right?
I reckon that we should make sure that by the time he comes back, our rapport and relationship is so strong that he sort of feels awkward and uncomfortable.
Okay, that is always my goal, is to make Dave Rubin feel awkward. Can I tell you where I am, which is a little awkward? It's actually not. My son thinks it's awkward. I am at High Point University, where my middle child, who's a senior in college, Nicholas, is beginning his senior year and moving him into his dorm. I told you right before we started, it actually still smells good. I don't know if that will last more than 2 weeks with 3 boys living in here. But do you see behind me? They've got the posters, they've got the Xbox, they've got the lights on top, that end randomly. So I feel a little, I get emotional every time I move a kid into college. This is the 5th straight year I've done that. And with few more, my other daughter's going to Ole Miss. She's moving her in next week as her sophomore year. Russell, you know how quickly this comes. Like, this is emotional, especially with boys who don't want their moms around.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're handling it real well, and I think it's a pretty solid show of your confidence in your son that you're willing to stream from his premises and digs because at any moment something awful could happen
I
in
know.
the background. This is a teenage boy, Sage.
He's a 21-year-old man, Russell.
Fair enough, fair enough. But
So
21, man, like I don't know if I'd have wanted people streaming from where I was living when I was 21. There was a lot of chaos and
oh,
the
for
potential
you?
for aromas and
Oh, for you, definitely. You would not have turned into Russell Brand, I think, for the world to know, had there been streaming services while you were 21 years old, right?
no, I don't think I'd have. I don't think I'd have survived. I think that level of access to pornography would have done me incredible harm. The dark web, the availability of drugs. Thank you, God, for ensuring that I was born in the 1970s and that I grew up with analog pornography and analog drug access. Because with digital access, I don't think I would have been able to take the fentanyl or the meth.
Oh my god. Okay, I'm gonna pretend like none of that exists in this world, at least with my kids. Everyone else's kids, I'm sure, do it. Not mine. They don't do anything. They don't even, the P word, pornography, no. No. Okay, can we change the subject?
If we make sure our children are raised, this is what I heard the other day, with like high self-esteem and that their primary identity is in God and in family, they won't fall into false idolatry. My daughters are again here, my 7-year-old and my 8-year-old, at my place of work at the moment, beloved Dave's studio. He has his own podcast, Shoot Me Straight, which people should check out, that he does with Eddie Gallagher, Navy SEAL, who won his trial when he was sort of accused of an unlawful killing of an ISIS member. Those guys do a podcast together here. Now, my little daughters are out there now with a bunch of like my friends and like a local pastor and other like mates that I've got in recovery. They're doing okay. They're right. I've set them a very simple task. They're writing stories about their week here. We went and saw a pirate show. They've got to work on a story about that. My father, as you might remember from last week, was over potentially poisoning pets with, like, chocolate treats and inappropriate snacks. So there could be an intervention from the kids at any time. And my hope is by the time they go to college, unless, by then maybe we have our own education system, Sage, that they'll go off with no interest in drugs or pornography or any of that stuff. I'll say, your dad did the research, so you don't have to.
Yes, exactly. Do as I say, not as I do. Okay, well, I more than welcome the girls coming in to interrupt. That was the best part of last week's show. No offense, when the girls came in.
Yeah, cute, man.
They are adorable. Okay, you know what's not cute? How about that for a segue? It's why they pay me the big bucks, as in nothing. Um,
Nothing.
I've been super interested to get your opinion on what is happening in our nation's capital. You're one of us, you know this, our nation's capital in Washington, D.C., where President Trump is calling for help because of the crime rates, which are, I mean, they've always been bad in the nation's capital. At one point, 10, 20 years ago, they led the country in a terrible statistic, like most homicides per capita. And despite what some people are saying, the crime rate continues to be a major issue in Washington, D.C. And President Trump is calling for help. Troops are being deployed, almost 1,000 of them. Take a look at what Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said earlier this week.
You will see them flowing into the streets of Washington in the coming week. At your direction as well, sir, there are other units we are prepared to bring in. Other National Guard units, other specialized units. They will be strong, they will be tough, and they will stand with their law enforcement partners. This is nothing new for DOD. As the president noted, at the border, we've got 10,000 troops down there who've been operating in defense cooperation areas, defense zones, where there's zero illegal crossings because of troops on strikers scanning the border. We've been protecting other people's borders for 20 years. It's about time we protect our own. And we're working with ICE and CBP. In Los Angeles, we did the same thing, working with the California National Guard, working with ICE officers. ICE officers deserve to do their job and not be attacked. We will work alongside all D.C. police and federal law enforcement to ensure this city is safe, this city is beautiful. And as I always say about President Trump to the troops, he has their back. And my message to the National Guard and federal law enforcement in Washington is, we have your back as well.
Honestly, to me, I don't know how any American can, and I know I'm in the minority maybe with this, but it's debatable, can disagree with what Pete Hegseth said there, where we want every city to be safe where people aren't fearful of walking the streets. Is it reality today? No, but the goal certainly should be to get there. And I'll just throw these numbers out before we get your take, Russell. Fourth highest murder rate in the country, Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. 6 times higher than New York City. It beats out some cities that have always had issues. Atlanta, city of Chicago, and even like that pocket of LA, Compton, terrible murder rates. And right now, DC's murder rates are brutal, 4th highest, like I said, doubled since 2012. And my question to you is, how can we argue that it's not the right thing if the local police forces in these cities aren't getting it done and the numbers continue to increase? Is it wrong for President Trump to do something like this on a national level, take control in order to make it safer?
The contract between the governed and the governing is always an exchange of freedom for protection. The principle of taxation is based on the idea that we're willing to hand over a portion of our income in order ultimately to be protected and for certain social duties and functions to be performed. In general, the Republican and Libertarian position, a position that's sort of evolving in this sort of modern communication age, has generally been minimal interventionism. There's a curious kind of paradox or potential contradiction, as conservatism does often align with interventionist law and order. It does frequently, and that kind of, I suppose, leads to the counter argument of, let's just use the word, of the left, for simplicity, that the conservatives want their rules and their laws enforced, but not the rights and protections of others. I remember sort of a story when New York sort of started to deploy kind of experimental robo dog type technology. And I remember what I felt about that then was they are using this to legitimize increased control. I can understand why people would be concerned about any measures that appear to be granting, if not new, certainly novel or unprecedented powers. And I noticed that in that speech, Hegseth wanted to illustrate that these powers have been deployed elsewhere successfully, notably at the border. And if you have a if you have a consensus and a mandate that what people want is DC to be cleared up and policed in a particular way, and that mandate is derived democratically, and what the agreement of your republic is that these matters are resolved through democratic process, then you don't have an argument at all. But I do feel, Sage, that we, in our position, just as like, sort of online commentators chatting about stuff, I try to, as best I can, look at what principle we are discussing rather than the issue, because the news cycle moves so quickly and so radically. It's so hazy and fluxy and confusing and baffling that I try to locate a principle. And it seems here the principle is that the justification of authority and military and law enforcement power in order to meet a certain goal. So if you're happy with it when Trump does it, would you be happy with it if someone did it in order to protect a set of principles that you didn't agree with? And I don't know, man. Personally, yeah, I think homeless people should be housed. I think that vagrancy should be taken care of. I do believe in a significant degree of social care, actually. But I certainly can see how this plays into the hands of detractors who, prior to the election of Trump, said, this guy's going to be authoritarian. He's going to make himself president for life. He's going to put police on the streets. He's going to execute the intelligentsia. Like, this is the kind of move that they will be able to point to as illustrative of their dread.
In the meantime, aren't they ignoring the issue at hand? To me, it's really black and white. And this is when I throw feelings out the window. And that is, yes, the conservative in me and the daughter of a army officer who everything is just very black and white. Is there a problem? Yes. What are we doing to fix the problem? Not enough, because the numbers continue to increase. So then what do we do to fix it if the people in current control, the leadership of the nation's capital or Los Angeles or Chicago, aren't doing it and the numbers keep increasing? Well, we have to help, because there's more good people than bad. We need to protect those good people. And if the people that we have elected to be in place are not doing it for a variety of reasons, do we just leave it? I say no. That's where I make it really, really black and white. Interestingly, since 2020, the laws in Washington D.C. changed. I think in many, especially larger, tend to be blue cities, law enforcement and people were trying to defund the police in many of these cities. And I listened to the police chief, or the president of the D.C. Police Union, spoke about this and gave the numbers. Usually there's a little over 4,000 police officers in the city in Washington D.C. Right now they're down more than 800. 800 less police officers that are needed to man these streets. And that has happened since 2020. So what is he saying? That they need these bodies. They need these people out there to help police to help police. And so because there's a shortage now, for whatever reason, they now have had no choice but to have 2 million extra hours of overtime per year for the existing officers, because there's not enough people out there. So if it continues like this, they're at a shortage. They need help. That's the sad part. I don't live there. I visited there last week and I posted about it because I was on the National Mall, and I used to call DC home. 20 years ago, I lived there. All 3 of my kids were born there. There are pockets that are great and beautiful, and I was encouraging tourists to come into those parts. But I imagine that if I lived there and experienced some of the things that residents are experiencing, We even had an ABC News anchor come out, and it was actually Kara Phillips. She's a wonderful journalist, and she came out on live TV and talked about how just in the last 6 months, right outside their studios, 2 people shot, 1 dead, an employee's car stolen just the other day, and she herself was jumped right outside the studio a couple of years ago. So I don't know. I don't think it should be as deep as it is. Is there an issue? What are we doing to fix it? If not enough, let Trump come fix it. And if it were Biden, I would 1,000% support it as well, because it's about the people.
My attitude towards first responders has really changed since living in your country. The police out here are sort of where, like, where I live right now, like the local police, the sort of, the sort of sheriff's department say, oh man, these people are friendly and lovely. I've had like prayers with cops that have pulled me over, always for minor infractions, or sometimes when I've been involved in incidents, just as a responsible member of the public. I do, if I see anything and I think I could be of some use, I tend to stop over, so I pull over and get involved. Like, so I've spent a lot of time with first responders since living in this part of the world, and I
Yeah.
think that those people that are charged with the obligation of protecting their community should be maximally supported, and that you don't have a society if you don't have police officers and paramedics and firefighters and teachers and medical professionals that feel honoured and cherished and treasured. Most generally, one might say that crime and public disorder are a response to poverty and different forms of dissatisfaction. And even if one don't want to lay the burden at the feet of the Trump administration, your country's been in all sorts of tumult for a long, long time. And under the Biden administration, there's been, the sort of tapering out of the opioid crisis, which for me was an indication of massive, massive pain. There's been a migration crisis in your country for a long time. There's been a sense of kind of collapse and I want to sort of say disintegration. And
Yeah.
I suppose I'm not surprised to see a measure like this undertaken. But what I generally feel, Sage, is that when it comes to matters of law enforcement, when people don't feel that those entrusted with ensuring laws are kept are integrally connected to the community, there can be a breakdown. I feel like that what you want to feel is that the police in particular are integrated, that they live in those communities, that they're part of the community, that there's an ongoing dialogue with that community. That don't mean not being, not tolerating crime. I don't think we should tolerate violence or, I understand that. What I'm saying is don't you think, like, when we're having these conversations, you and me who are sort of aligned in enough ways to be friends, that we have a kind of responsibility to think about, well, what is the counter argument then? Like, what are they saying when, say last week when we're discussing something a bit lighter, like the Sydney Sweeney jeans or whatever, why is it that, sometimes I can't even see it. Sometimes I can't even see what the outrage is. In this instance, I can see it because they were primed by the media to regard Trump as a dictatorial figure. And now measures are being taken that grant power to a branch of at least law enforcement that don't ordinarily have control of DC. And so that
Yeah.
you can see how they're going to interpret that.
I, you mentioned control earlier and things getting out of control, and it is. It already is. Obviously, it's easy maybe to say from here, we are not in Washington, D.C. or Los Angeles, which I actually flip it and say, okay, well, then it's easy for us to ignore. We're choosing not to ignore
Mm.
it because we care about humanity. And we do have to get outside of ourselves and think, what would it be like if I'm in his shoes or her shoes? So yeah, it's easier to ignore it, but I choose not to because I want to be able to go anywhere in this country and not feel unsafe. I
Mm.
do fascinating, and I'll shut up over this one because this topic does fascinate me. I think it's so interesting that the mayor of Washington, D.C., just like the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, when they sent National Guard troops to Los Angeles a couple months ago because the protests were out of control, that they say they don't need or want the help. But when things are out of control, when people are getting badly injured, sometimes killed, as far as the protests that were happening, et cetera, and like, why wouldn't you want that help? Aren't we all supposed to be on the same page to protect our citizens? It's almost like ego is getting in the
Mm.
way more for these
Mm.
people than actually protect. Because if Donald Trump sends his troops in and things get better, they'll have to acknowledge it was the right thing. God forbid that happens, and that doesn't happen quite often on either side of the aisle. But for this topic in particular, if it's out of control, which it is, those riots were terrible. You weren't doing anything about it or enough. Your police forces have been demolished ever since 2020. Why would they not want the help? That's the part that's fascinating to me.
Well, I reckon because there's not a consensus over what the problem is. Every so often, well, actually now, continually, the news cycle throws up topics of division. It's like it's unending. Kyle
Yeah.
Rittenhouse, like one side, this guy is a hero, he's doing the right thing. He's a racist murderer. Like the whole, like it's just an incessant, unending sort of stream of conflict. I was in DC like a little while ago to do something with Maha. I'm friends with some people, as you know, like you in the administration. And I thought, oh, this, it's the first time, because I've only been to Washington a couple of times before. And I guess the time before this, it was cold. I went in the inauguration. It was so cold that I couldn't focus on anything. All I could think was, I'm so cold. And I didn't pack the right coat. It was awful. This time when I went, I felt, oh, this is Rome with its incredible and impressive buildings, its marvelous monuments of power. But I know that there's a lot of analysis these days that points towards the idea that this country may be in decline for global economic reasons. Certainly, whether it's decline or not, is in a period of transition, radical transition. And I think a significant component in this transition is the way that America views herself. Some people ardently, religiously disavow the Trump administration, and other people regard Trump as a kind of, to some he's a demigod, and to others he's a demagogue. And that's a very difficult thing to reconcile. And it was like that with the previous administration. There weren't many people, I suppose, that were sort of smitten with Joe Biden, but there certainly were a lot of people that loathed him. And the reason that I'm generally broadly supportive is because I still do consider myself a guest in your country. Listen to this accent. And because I think the greatest threat that freedom has ever known was in the form of global imperialism that I believe in general offers you protection. It offers you protection and safety in exchange for freedom. Now, I'm talking there about the COVID pandemic and the measures that were undertaken then. And in general, I think neoliberalism in the form of its leftist practitioners in your country, in mine, and Canada is the biggest threat freedom has ever known. That out of social democracy, a form of tyranny that's difficult to imagine has grown. And anomalous populist politicians and political movement like MAGA and Trump, while not perfect, and I can certainly see how the opponents of Trump can use an event like this as a part of their arsenal, that I don't think it's as significant a threat as the previous set of challenges.
Right before we started recording, what did we talk about? I said, how are you? You're like, I'm great, because I've accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. And like, your perspective is so beautiful on that. And I do believe that prayer is so necessary. Yes, for the people in these cities who are experiencing crime in the residents, but for our leadership to continue to do the thing that they believe is right for everyone. Again, sometimes it's easier to put your head in the ground, and just bury it under the sand and let it go, because it doesn't affect you. We need to keep praying that our leaders make the right decisions. I believe this is the right thing. I say protect at all costs, even though it's imperfect. So that's all I got, Russell Brand. I love talking it through with you because you do make me think of so many different perspectives, but it's heartbreaking in many ways.
Sage, that was a brilliant conversation on the complex subjects of DC authoritarianism and the militarization of the police force, which has been a trend that's been going for a lot longer than the Trump administration. Indeed, during the COVID pandemic, many of the resources that weren't ultimately used to prop up businesses or support people or provide the social care that many of the measures that were funded and suggested by the Biden administration during that time ended up being used to buy drones and militarizing existing police vehicles, I'm sure you're familiar with. So the trend to militarize the police benefits the left and the right, because the centralized state, many people believe, remains protected regardless of who is in office. But here's another one of those hot button subjects that we discuss here, and another one that I've got a particular interest in because President Trump has confirmed that they are looking at reclassifying marijuana from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 and expects a decision within a couple of weeks, which means they can't be smoking it themselves because otherwise they'd need a lot longer to reflect on it, write poems about it, and maybe even have a dream walk in which they work out what would be the right schedule. Let's have a look at Trump giving that speech right now. Me and Sage will talk about the benefits and deficits of such a policy.
Is going to reclassify marijuana. Would that send mixed messages that if marijuana is okay, some drugs are okay, but we're trying to clean up crime? How do they go hand in hand?
We're only looking at that. That's early, but somebody reported it, which is fine. We're looking at it. Some people like it. Some people hate it. Some people hate the whole concept of marijuana because if it does bad for the children, it does bad for people that are older than children. But we're looking at reclassification, and we'll make a determination over the next few weeks. And that determination hopefully will be the right one. It's a very complicated subject, the subject of marijuana. I've heard great things having to do with medical, and I've had bad things having to do with just about everything else. But medical and, for pain and various things, I've heard some pretty good things. But for other things, I've heard some pretty bad things.
When I watch Trump live, I'm always reassured just on the personal level that he's a person that I would enjoy being around. What I find difficult when I read the content or watch the content of the many vociferous and articulate people that detest Donald Trump, I always think, how have you missed this kind of affability that he has, this kind of common touch, this vernacular ease? Now, with regard to this particular matter, I'm a drug addict in recovery, and for me, a 12-step oriented abstinence-based solution is an absolute non-negotiable must. But I've always regarded, Sage, the issue of addiction as a mental health one rather than a criminal judicial one. So any measures that ultimately reorient public consciousness towards regarding drug dependency or drug use, even though many people, of course, would say that, marijuana or cannabis oughtn't even be regarded as a drug because it's, natural, and all of the sort of common arguments that are offered to exempt cannabis from the regulatory laws that would apply to something like cocaine or heroin or LSD or ketamine or MDMA. I'm just thinking of a list of things that would get me through the afternoon with a smile on my face, and that I hope there's not a trace of in that dormitory room from which Sage Steele is streaming right now. What do you feel? Do you think it's generally positive for economic reasons, political reasons, and criminal judicial reasons? And what do you think it suggests about the overall purview of the Trump administration when it comes to subjects like addiction, criminality, and recreational drug use?
Yeah, I like that they are willing to have discussions about this and really weigh the pros and cons, the positives and negatives, and try to make the right decision, which is never 100%, good or bad based on your perspective. Like, not everybody's going to agree. Here's where I'm kind of a prude about this, and I'll admit, um, I've never smoked pot in my life. I've never smoked a cigarette in my life. I've led a pretty boring, clean life in that way, Russell. And I actually know President Trump has never taken a drink in his life either. So I would assume, especially based on the way he's speaking, that he also has not done any sort of drug. He's been very open about that because his brother was an alcoholic and died from alcoholism, and that's why he's never touched it. He saw the devastation of it from a very young age. There's addiction in my family, and to me, it is a gateway drug. That's just from my experience. So therefore, I have a fear in general of anything like that. It is certainly, we've become desensitized to it, just like alcohol, through the last several decades. It went from, oh my gosh, you're smoking pot in your dorm room, that could never happen, to, it's pretty common in dorm rooms, and sometimes the RAs do nothing about it. It scares me. It just, to me, it leads, it's a gateway. One thing leads to another. But I also understand and respect the positives involved, including the medical marijuana. Cancer patients that I know that have found solace in that, and it has helped them physically and mentally. So that's why I think it's smart for them to go deep and really discuss the pros and cons. It is confusing based on the state. We do want states running a lot of things, right? Like education. Abortion is by the states now, as I think it always should have been. So where's that line? Do we want it state? Do we want it federal? Like for what topic? For what issues? It's a tough one for me, but I admit to being sensitive because of some of the experiences in my family.
I feel that in general, the government has no business intervening in a person's experiments in consciousness. And I suppose when I was when the lines were in the culture were more clearly drawn, when on one side there were people that were pro free speech, pro civil rights, pro general permissiveness, and that was regarded as the cultural and social left. I strongly believed in like the perspective of someone like Terence McKenna, a brilliant genius, ethnobotanist, and psychedelic journeyman who believed that access to these states is pivotal and fundamental for advancing societies and cultures. In my country at the moment, they're doing experiments on DMT, IV experimentation. DMT is a powerful hallucinogen. And the reason that they're experimenting with DMT is because a lot of people who take these psychedelics and hallucinogens, in particular the one I just named, are discovering consistent experience, vivid yet consistent
Yeah.
experiences that suggest an objective ulterior reality. Now, I'm interested in that, of course, for spiritual reasons, because the claims that are made by any of us that have a belief in a spiritual realm and believe that the most powerful level of reality is not received through the senses but through the spirit, i.e., we live by faith and not by sight, we don't conform to the patterns of this world. On that basis, I see the use of substances, consciousness altering substances is potentially important, not necessarily for everybody, but I
Yeah.
think it's one when we're looking at what are going to be the complex solutions to a world that seems increasingly divided and on the precipice of all manner of crises and conflagration. Well, it would seem altering consciousness might be a solution and finding new ways of looking at reality. So that's one sort of somewhat esoteric perspective, that human beings should have access to their full capacity and should be able to use drugs if they can safely do it. That obviously doesn't include me. I can't safely use drugs. I'm a lunatic. But the other argument is I don't think the state has got any business in. I believe in minimal interventionism. I think that the role of the state should not be of pedagogy or demagoguery, but simply of the administration of social tasks decreed by a consensus delivered by the electorate. I wouldn't have political leaders grandstanding and offering moral and ethical positions. It would just be, this is when we're collecting your trash. This is when we are concreting over that paving. This is how we're going to protect that particular border, minimize their power and their intervention. So something like, if control of the government is so granular that they get to decide whether or not a substance can be taken by adults, I think that's an indication that what's been normalized is a level of authoritarianism that needs to be radically reviewed, whether it's under a supposed Democrat like Kamala Harris or the current administration. So my
But
position
what
is,
about what about bigger drugs that everyone knows? So heroin, cocaine. I mean, what is the line where you think, or is it all drugs? You don't think there should be any laws and people can do what they want?
well, I think there's, yeah, that is one way of saying what I believe. Yes, I think there should be zero prohibition, and that these highly addictive substances should be regulated from a medical perspective rather than a criminal judicial one.
Wow.
That there are probably some people that can safely take cocaine, and those people shouldn't waste police. Look, the reason is, it must be in some way more profitable and beneficial to keep drugs illegal, because if it wasn't, drugs would be legal. I don't believe that the motivations of the state are really ever to protect people. I think they are generally to control people. And if people are helped as an inadvertent consequence of that control, then so be it. But I believe the motivation is always control. And I think that expands beyond administrations. That's my perspective. So I would say this is an easy win. And I understand what you're saying. If you do, because my actual personal journey with drugs, Sage, was exactly that. I smoked weed. And I'm like, oh, that's good. Let's take acid. I took acid acid. Oh, that's good. Let's take MDMA. Oh, that's good. Let's take coke. That's good. Let's take heroin and crack. That's exactly how it was for me. But, that gives me these insights. What was I looking for? I was looking for a spiritual experience. I was looking for an anesthetic against the culture that was not telling me that we are sacred beings here to have a holy experience, to experience God in the present moment, to experience God now, not to live listless, pleasure-oriented lives where we are controlled, where our desires are stimulated by the culture, our fears are stimulated by the culture, and we ping between those two poles like hopeless atoms robbed of our personal autonomy.
Okay, no one can say that the way that you just said that. It's amazing. And I do think we agree. I think that's very much a libertarian perspective and conservative, where don't govern us. You do you, I'm going to do me. And I actually love that and respect that and do desire that in many ways. It's just that I don't know, and this is a fact. We know that not everybody has the strength, literally and figuratively, to step away, to stop. And many people, like you admitted yourself, cannot do drugs safely. Does that mean it should be outlawed to prevent it? Um, I don't know. Like, I don't have a firm opinion on either side of it. I just know I'm scared of all of it and the devastation that comes with it. To your point about profit, you're right. Always, always, always. I do think if you just legalize it everywhere, then, I mean, there's going to be a lot of people making a lot of money on it. And there's a lot of benefit to everybody. So maybe, yeah, I'm struggling with this one still, Russell, because of personal experience,
Yeah.
And I love that you're so open with what you experience too, because that's why people say no, no, no. We got to, hold people accountable for doing illegal things, and then maybe that will save them from devastation and death. But to what end?
The thing is, once you accept the principle that the government is in a position of authority,
Yes.
then that authority, they're going to use that authority however they want. And sometimes you'll have a government that's more in alignment with what you want, and sometimes less in alignment. But I reject the principle itself. They're not in authority. They're in service. And this is one of the ways where you can somewhat safely explore that principle, because I think increasingly people are coming to terms with the idea that, well, let's look at, prohibition. Why is this not prohibition around alcohol in America? Because it created crime. It didn't work anyway. People in general wanted to be able to drink. Okay, so what do you think is the fundamental difference? Is marijuana, or cannabis, as most people prefer calling it? Some say that Mary Jane is a sort of in itself a racist term. Some people say that that it's already, the etymology of that term is, it's its own thing. Anyway, but my point is that cannabis is not, generally speaking, as harmful as alcohol. And so if alcohol is the the
Exactly.
measure, then sort of legalize all of it. And in a way, after the opioid crisis and what that revealed about the goals and attitudes of big pharma and the inability of the government to protect people from those mendacious intentions, is further demonstration, if you ask me, that they got no business even dealing in this stuff, and they should get right out of it. And it's just one of the easy wins that draws a line of that. This is not, government are not involved in this. This is none of their business. That's not to say that we should be permissive about drug use. Personally, I don't think people should in general be. If your life is built on the pursuit of pleasure, it's over anyway, because you're going to die. Pleasure is temporary. You've totally missed the point, and get out of it. And most people are taking drugs. Most people that are taking drugs addictively and are causing social problems as a result of it, i.e. crime and chaotic behavior, those people are sick and need help. And you could probably use the revenue generated from the legal sale of these substances to create social structures that were of some value and support, and compassionately dealt with this problem rather than punitively.
I'll shut up after this. I said that twice today, but I really mean it. That's per topic. I'll shut up. This is it for me. I go back to the other side when I look at downtown Philadelphia and the rows and rows and blocks of streets in every single city. I'm sorry, what's the drug now? See, I'm clueless. That everybody, you walk around like zombies and they're asleep, and that fentanyl. Thank you. Like, to see these videos everywhere. And so when there's no accountability, which is what the case has been in these cities, it's zombie land, and it's devastating because they are human beings. And in the meantime, we're handing out needles and just saying, go for it. there's when there's no accountability because of the mental health that leads people to do those drugs. Now look what we have, and that is definitely related to the crime topic, which we discussed at the beginning of the show. So yeah, we agree that this is a tough one for some of those reasons.
Hmm.
But then you go back and say, well, good luck, to each his own, and there's a cost to that as well, as I think that we've seen. How funny. We are actual friends, and we could not be more different in so many ways. That's what I love about this. Like, I'm the prude. It was like, I'm afraid. Do you know what I thought to myself when I was in high school? I was like, oh my gosh, if I smoke pot, like, I'll die. Like, that equals death. And so that's been my mentality. And now I'm 52 years old. I've never done it. Everyone's like, you are so lame. I'm like, yes, I've been called worse, but yes. And then I love that you're so out there and open. And one day I want to pick your brain about like what it feels like. And the obvious reasons why people become addicted, and the strength that it took you to walk away, which I know is rooted in your faith for sure as well. But I'm in awe. But I watch those videos nonstop, Russell, on these streets, because I can't imagine what it took for that human being to think it was safe enough to put that needle in their arm and what it led to. Fascinated and still heartbroken because, again, I've experienced that loss in my family.
Because people will do whatever it takes to avoid pain sometimes. People will do whatever it takes. And in a sense, it's, like St. Paul says, it is not actually strength, it's weakness. It's a willingness to
Yeah.
surrender. When you go, I can't do this anymore, I can't do it. In fact, like active addiction is an attempt to control your psychic environment, which has become unbearable to you. I remember when I used drugs, I was using drugs with people that had a lot worse habits and a lot worse consequences than me. People that were sleeping rough, people that were ulcerated, ravaged and ruined by heroin. And I used to think, wow, man, they're willing to pay that price. They're willing to
Yeah.
push through amputation, loss of eye, homelessness, desperation. That must be a very, very, very strong driver. But people will be motivated, all of us are motivated by things that we don't entirely understand
Yeah.
and can very easily be manipulated. And in surrendering to God, one is in Christ, you are inaccessible to the demonic forces of both temptation and systemic control. That doesn't mean that the world immediately changes once you accept Christ. It just means that in the past, there is my sin, my brokenness. This is redeemed through him. In the future, there is all my fear that ultimately is ossified in a fear of death and ultimate loss, which we will experience, yet through him we will know eternal life.
Yeah.
Therefore, he has taken care of the past. He has taken care of the future. What does that leave for us? The present. And in the present, we disciple ourselves to him. We serve and love in kindness. Now, of course, we won't be able to do that all the time because the external stimulants will pull us into fear or desire. Our function and our goal is to ensure that we support only systems that minimally impact people with fear, minimally impact people with desire. And all the while we're caught in this confusion of the culture war, we are not making the choices that we need to make. Surrender to Christ and engage in the spiritual warfare that's unfolding all around us even now. Become a soldier on the side of righteousness and love and part of one family that includes all of us and ends all arguments because he loves us all and judges none of us except in so much that he was willing to die for our sins. And he would have died for just Sage, he would have died for just Russell, and he would have died for just you, whoever you are.
What a beautiful way to wrap this up. I think I got cut off earlier when I was saying with the first topic, and trying to deploy police officers to the nation's capital. We need to be sitting in prayer. At least that's what I choose to do, and I know you do as well, for our leaders to try to continue making the best decisions possible for everyone. And these decisions are not easy. And I pray that President Trump and his staff and the mayors in every single city, even the mayors that think differently than us, that they can continue to lead with the goal for peace in their hearts for so many people and so many people who are suffering. We think we know the answers and we do not. That's why we try to have these conversations and just bring a different perspective. What a blessing it is to have it. And especially with you, Russell Brand. every
I think with
single
you, I
week.
think that's beautiful prayer. Amen. Amen. Thank you. Yeah, for praying for those with whom we disagree. Pray for
Yeah.
them and pray for our common good to be served. I think that's great. Thank you, Sage. Look, I think I'm going to say it. It's better without Dave. He was holding us back. He was ruining it. He's. I believe I don't know. I've not researched this, but I've heard he's actually gay. Which is he
Although
Jewish? Is he Jewish?
He's
Nah,
Jewish
man.
and
Nah.
gay.
Forget that. Forget that shit. Ah, no.
I will wrap it up with this. If anyone missed the very first show we did with Jillian Michaels, go back and watch it. When Russell Brand realized suddenly, when we were taping as if we were live, wait, Jillian's not bringing her husband to the next show? No, maybe her wife. He had no idea she was gay. It was so classic. Great memories as we reminisce.
Yeah,
Go
I
with
don't
your
mind
babies.
about that. God bless you. I can hear them. Can you hear them?
I can hear them. I love them. Bye.
Take
I love
care.
you.
God bless
See
you.
ya.
See ya.